Okay, so I feel this bit about masking is so relevant because I was getting a little bit frustrated. You guys know that what's really important to me is that what I'm bringing to you is information that is applicable, immediately applicable to either you as a coach or someone who just has this wiring. And the vocabulary that I use around wiring that is ADHD wiring is because it's absolutely crystal clear that there is no such thing as having ADHD or not having ADHD, right? Everything. It has a spectrum. The idea of recognizing that you have some wiring that is following the patterns of what is ADHD wiring is the important part to understand. The masking stuff to me is the answer to the question of why there's so much that is relatable, even if you don't have ADHD, but you may just have some aspects of it. So you may have a problem with time, but you don't actually have some of the other stuff that is typically considered to be ADHD stuff. It doesn't mean that you don't have it. It's not for you then. It means that you're actually not trying hard enough. Doesn't mean that you don't have that wiring. It just means that you do have that going on to some degree. And whether it's conditioning or whether it's natural, for you, it may be something that is in that particular area really prominent and in another area not. And that's really important to discern. So when we throw numbers around, I'm getting really picky about, I'm looking at numbers that say 2 or 3% of the population has ADHD. And then I'm looking at other numbers that say potentially up to 20% of people, and even more men than women, so maybe bigger than that for men, have ADHD. Essentially, what we're talking about, obviously, is an assessment thing. This is an assessment problem. This is that the DSM-5 has, which is the standard, the medical standard. It's looking at certain aspects of it and saying, if you have enough of this wiring to be diagnosably ADHD, then you fall into this category. But that is not the business that we're in, right? If I was giving a talk at a conference, a summit with psychologists and people who follow sort of allopathic diagnoses, then I would have to back it up with a way of approaching it as a diagnosis, an aggregate of enough of it. But we're coaching. I'm coaching. A lot of you are coaching. And so if you happen to have a little bit of this wiring one way, then what's really essential as a coach is to recognize that wiring. And so the masking stuff becomes so important for us to understand as coaches and as people who may be wired this way. Again, and I know I sound like a broken record now, not so that it's an excuse, not to say, throw your hands up and say, it's not my fault then. I'm wired this way and therefore there's no hope and nobody should expect me to A, B, C, or D. But instead, it's to recognize that you have to approach it differently. If you do have this wiring, it's banging your head against the wall. The futility of trying to white knuckle it through a type of coaching or approach or anything that is going to be successful for a neurotypical person is just not going to be successful for you, which doesn't mean that you can't get the outcome. It doesn't mean you can't be successful. It doesn't mean you can't be on time. It doesn't mean that you can't focus. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means that if it is imperative for you to accomplish those things, you are so better served to acknowledge the way that you're wired so you can figure out a better way to do it. And that's what I feel my mission is here. That's what I really want to be doing with my own coaching and with the coaches that I offer mentorship to and support to, and a greater, wider network, which I think is really starting to emerge the more I look, is how to make that distinction. I wanted to talk about stimulation tonight. So stimulation is the core of the problem for what is seen as a problem for people wired this way. So what's really vital is to remember that the hunger for stimulation is not the problem. The problem is ignoring it. So stimulation is a craving. It's very much an addiction. So for those of you and those of us who have this kind of desire for stimulation, which is what ADHD feels for most people, is this constant sort of need or desire for more. It's a need that does have to be fed. You're not going to be able to just choose not to feed it and feel really good. Your nervous system is going to fight you. Your emotions are going to fight you. You're swimming upriver when you're trying to do this. And the world tends to dole it out in this really tempered, very falsely advertised, not just to neurodiverse, but to neurotypical people. It's also falsely advertised, right? The places where we can get stimulation, how we're supposed to get stimulation, how we're supposed to feel good. But coaching and therapy are one of the most difficult areas for this, because artificially inserting a way to temper stimulation or to shift stimulation is essentially helping someone to mask more. So the question that every coach needs to ask themselves, and if I could throw a giant sort of blanket over the world of coaching, would be stop trying to coach your clients to mask better, which is what a lot of it does, right? It lays out these are the ways that you will be successful. So says universal principles. And therefore, you should figure out how to override the things inside of you that don't do it this way, or that don't doing it this way, and make yourself these other ways of doing it. And so masking essentially, so you know what I mean by masking, right? Masking is not when you're choosing to adapt yourself to an environment or a situation. That's just being emotional, having a high emotional IQ. Right? So you act one way in a certain company, another way in another company. Masking is when you actually feel there is something wrong with the way that you are. Therefore, you have to act another way in order to feel you're doing something right. And masking is, for someone with ADHD, is essentially stimulant management. It's that way too. My little blurb last week where I was saying this is very relatable for people who don't have ADHD if they happen to be introverts in an extroverted world. Often the way that we naturally parent, but we feel we can't share it or show it because there has been some sort of understanding in society that you're supposed to not do it or do it. So there's these other ways, I won't go on, but these other ways that everyone, literally every human being, can relate to masking. But for those of us who are wired this way, I'm going to go through some of the really specific ways that we do it. And I want the coaches listening to be able to listen to how they are going to be able to better coach people so that they can make those distinctions. So a lot of the sort of problem that we associate with ADHD behaviors are this underfed seeking of stimulation, right? So you're looking for novelty, impulsivity, endless options. And if you're understimulated, that feels a constant, frustrating, unmet need. If you're overstimulated, which very often happens to people who are seeking so much stimulation, if you're overstimulated, it turns into anxiety and dysregulation. So essentially what we're always trying to do is to figure out the right dose for ourselves, because we know that there's this sweet spot in between. And I talked a month or more ago about learning how to feel when your brain is really good, when you get this really good feeling in your brain. And essentially that's what you have done, is you have found the exact right level of stimulation for your brain. And everything that you want, that if you were to coach somebody where you recognize some of this wiring is going on, that should be your primary incentive, is to figure out where do they actually feel their brain feels good, where it's not overstimulated, it's not understimulated. That's going to be literally the greatest gift that you can give to them. The needs that are universal in us, things, connection and significance and purpose and all that kind of stuff, none of that changes, right? There's absolutely nothing different about what we ultimately desire, no matter which way we're desired. It's about how we're actually going about it. I think that one of the traps that can happen, so I'm going to talk about some of these traps in coaching, is that we're often asked to help people stop a behavior, right? So NLP is quite good at saying we're not overly interested in why the behavior is what it is. We're more interested in how the behavior manifests. How does the behavior show up? How is it experienced? And then we can shift that. But we never want to go in blindly and stop a behavior. And I do carry a bit of an issue with NLP practitioners this way because very often, if it aligns with a universal better way of being, then the coach feels they're doing a favor to their client by stopping the behavior, right? So someone who says that they're not comfortable with eye contact, say, it would be tempting as a coach to help somebody change that behavior so that they can. But if this is somebody who is naturally introverted, not even talking about ADHD right now, just a naturally introverted person, this is actually going to fuck with the way that they engage, that their brain engages. It's not going to be comfortable for them to have constant eye contact if they're not wired, not ADHD wired, but if they're not wired that way. And so helping somebody to have that behavior is not necessarily going to be beneficial for that person. They need to find out what is the desired reason why they want the eye contact, right? So ultimately, they may say, I want people to feel I'm really listening to them, or I want people to know that I care about them, or whatever. It could even be something I want more influence or power in a conversation, and I'm told that's how, that sort of thing. And then when you can figure out what it is that they actually want, you can find a way for a person to, say, demonstrate a lot more connection in a conversation without having to get their nervous system to do something eye contact that is fundamentally going against their wiring. And so a really good coach who understands this would instead find a way where they can use their words, or they can use some other form of body language where they can actually demonstrate deep interest or openness or whatever it is. So that's just a little example, but you can imagine I could do a 4-hour talk just on the types of behaviors that historically and very often I have done it in my own career, where we help people because of the power of NLP, because we know we can shift internal representations. We can help people to develop a behavior that actually may help them in the moment, but it doesn't help them 5 years from now. It doesn't help them 10 years from now, because it's something that fundamentally goes against who and what they are. And so it's not going to work long term. I want to talk about some of these masking essential points that I've pulled out in terms of masking. So there's a Steve Jobs, of all people. There's this quote that is often, you guys have probably heard it. It's a question he was asked, and somebody said to him, what did you learn at Apple that you're bringing into wherever he went next? I think it was a company called Next. And he paused for a very long time. And what he said was, I now take a longer term view of people. So instead of fixing the mistakes, you let the person learn from it, because he wants to build a team. And he realized that he's not building a team for next year. He's building a team for the next decade. Fix the problem, you get a year. Let them learn who they are, and you'll get a decade. And I loved it. I heard it just randomly. And I think it speaks so accurately and is so important to what we're actually doing as coaches. And the idea of helping somebody to mask better is treating it, it's a broken thing to be fixed for the short term. There's 6 sort of traps that I want to get into. The first one is it's what I was talking about with the eye contact, these behavior things. So these are networking events. So I could call this a script trap, because there is a script that was written by the people who run a society. So these tend to be extroverts. They tend to be men. They tend to be people of power. They tend to be people who have been able to work within the system as it is to gain success. We all have these stories of outliers. And of course, there's a million stories of quirky people who became successful despite all of this. But we're really talking about the people that actually wrote the script. And so these are the things, handshakes and eye contact and icebreakers and power postures and getting into executive mindset and how to make your voice project more, how to make decisions more quickly. All of these types of things that are taught specifically to men, but also to women who are in positions where they want to have more. And all of these are things that are really counter to a lot of the wiring that isn't typical wiring. So, unmasking that with a client, someone who wants those things, because there's nothing wrong with wanting the success that comes along with those things, right? There's nothing wrong with a client who comes in and says, I want to make more money. I want to rise higher. I want to have more clients. I want to triple my business. Those are all really important goals for a lot of people. But for you to be able to actually help them get there, you need to be asking to your client, what is the cost on your brain to get it that way? And they are not going to have an answer, chances are, because they don't know. But you can know. So you can learn what the cost is for a brain that is wired another way to force itself into being this way. So it is a matter of going into the values, which again, I do workshops just on values alone, but making sure that you're extracting the point, the purpose, the value. It's the ecology check, right? So if you get this outcome, what does it cost you by getting it this way? And then come up with other ways where they can achieve the same outcome. So there's nothing really practical and applicable to do in this one other than actually do the ecology check. Just make sure that the person is able to get a different lens on what is the cost to you when you act that way. And you're just going to walk them through the experience, right? Have them give you the feedback of what it's to carry themselves that way or behave that way or even think that way. And then you have this willpower trap. These are the suppression tactics. This is trying to suppress the desire for certain types of stimulation. So things count to 10 before you say anything in a meeting or write down, listen on the notebook in front of you while you're in a meeting to remind yourself to do that. Literally bite your tongue. I have had coaches who have anchored their people into biting their tongue. These are things that people with ADHD are notorious for interrupting, for not being able to hold back the impulse to interrupt or to speak or whatever. And these type of things that bring them back is the analogy is taking a beach ball and holding it underwater. And it continuously is hard to hold it underneath the water. It never stops putting pressure and trying to get up, but it tires you out to hold it down. And so the unmasking of this would be to actually, rather than trying to stop your brain, rather than trying to muzzle your brain, would be to actually give your brain a job. So make yourself be a note taker. Start being someone that can actually take notes during a meeting, or find ways to engage where you may preface a conversation with, I just want to let you know that I get really excited and I tend to jump in, and I'm going to try not to do that. But I just want to let you know up front, it's never for lack of wanting to hear or disrespect what you're saying. So just stop me if I do that. And you give them permission to understand this is who you are. This is not something that you want to come across disrespectfully, but it allows them to have that permission where you can actually be who you are and stay at your best without having to suppress. We actually know that when you have to suppress, so when you have to use, like for the ADHD brain, which is fundamentally the weakest part of the brain, is controlling the impulse. And so using that cognitive action to suppress an impulse or an emotion or anything really where you're using the cognition to suppress makes the next task that you do less good. It's a better word to say that. It makes you less effective when you look at the next tasking. And so it's really useful to work with your client to figure out ways how they can do less suppression and more figuring out how to let themselves express and also do it in a way that is not going to cost. The next one worth talking about is this systems trap. Anything that is a system is unlikely to be helpful for the ADHD brain. So planners, all the apps, And I'm sorry to people that have worked hard to create these apps for ADHD people. I don't know if you have tried any of them, but in my quest to understand this better, I've downloaded so many of them and genuinely tried to use them. I can't. It's just because of that inability to effectively get the reward through using the system. So there's going to be exceptions to this, right? If you have a job that has a built-in system and you've actually gotten accustomed to using the built-in system in a way that's helpful and useful to you, then certainly you may actually override this. But normally systems run on importance. If you have one that runs on feeling good, so like some of you may feel like you have ADHD wiring, but you have a system that works for you, say in the morning. Maybe you get up and you do your yoga and then you have your tea and then you, I don't know, jump in your pool or whatever. And it's actually beautiful. It's actually a system that puts you into a really good space in your nervous system and your mental, emotional space. And you do it religiously. It's because you do it because it feels good. You get all the dopamine from it. You get the reward system from it. You get everything that it's meant to deliver is actually delivered. The systems that don't work are the ones that you can't feel. They're the ones that you have to think. They're the ones where they run on importance, right? So if it's a system that runs on importance of things, you're going to drop it almost immediately because it's just not going to stay lodged into a way that it can be remembered, enjoyed, and kept to. So unmasking this would be like scaffolds, like taking them apart on purpose. So things, body doubling, this is where it's really helpful. So actually creating real deadlines for yourself. So I think I talked about this before where you can cut the deadlines. So rather than having a end of day deadline, you actually make it a game for yourself to have a 12 minutes from now deadline to try and do something and do it in the next 10 minutes, then repeat it back for 2 and see if you can. So you have these little short sort of surges. You're actually working with a natural sort of electrical system that really works for you and is very felt in terms of your progress and how you're getting through things. The bottling, doubling just works because of the stimulant, right? The stimulant of another person, even if they're not doing something the same. This may be something where if you have a client who's coming to you and is so tired of masking at work, what's likely happening for them is they're having to pretend that there's somebody who can follow a system, or they're having to pretend that there's somebody who does complete something and sees it all the way through. And it doesn't change the fact that they need to get things done. It doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, if you do have a job and you need to make an income, which most of us do, then there is going to be certain things that have to get done. But instead of pretending you can follow a system the normal way, what would be helpful as a coach is to help that person be able to come up with these other ways of doing it where they are going to be able to do the work and stay focused and get it done and all that kind of stuff. But if what it requires is for you to go to your boss and unmask what's going on and say, listen, I really want to get this done. I really want to do it well, but I'm never going to be able to do it the way that you want me to do it. I'm going to have to actually do it my way because otherwise it's not going to work for you and it's not going to work for me. I'm going to burn out and be gone in 3 months and you're going to be unhappy and unsatisfied. And so when you have a way to coach somebody, or if they are their own boss, to get them into a deep acceptance of find a system that you can feel through every step that doesn't rely on importance. And when you have it, allow yourself to have it. Allow yourself to experience it this way and keep adapting it. Keep making sure that you're making it work for whatever purpose it needs to serve. And this is a lot of the meta modeling and the meta feeling you have around this. Then there's this praise trap. So one of the things that we do really well with NLP coaching and with parenting and with being a boss and all of this kind of stuff is that we praise people for the things that are not aligned with who you really are, who they really are. If you said to somebody who is naturally shy, if you said, nobody could tell you were nervous, that was so great, it is a compliment. It's a gold star that they get for essentially having hid really well who they really are, how they really are. And so we want to be very careful that when you're praising yourself or when you're getting praise or when you're offering praise to the people that you may or may not know how they're wired, that you're not praising people for the thing that they've overcome in themselves, that if you really stop to think about it for a minute, is probably something that you're enabling and you're actually helping them to believe that thing that is actually them is wrong and that whatever they did instead is better. And so, as a coach, because we're very good with NLP at changing behaviors, if we haven't done that initial question of what is the cost of this, if we haven't done sort of an ethical look and a deep understanding of wiring to make sure that whatever change we're helping people have is ethically aligned with, is it actually better for them, not just to fix the immediate problem, but over a long term, then we can end up in a place where we have helped them change, and then we praise them for the change, thus actually becoming someone who is doing more damage than good. And I'm not, like I said, I've done this throughout my whole career. I got really good at helping people change behaviors that as I look back now and have such a new sort of understanding of it, I would have done it differently. And I don't feel as though I should be reprimanded for doing damage because I certainly wasn't. It was never my intention, nor can any one coach or anything understand the full wiring of a human being. We've got more wires in there than stars in the sky or whatever, right? And at the end of the day, we don't know how those all work. We don't know the inner workings, these intricacies of every single person's wiring. But knowing the more you can learn about this, the more you can make sure that you can actually adapt yourself to what is going to praise who they actually are instead of who they are trying to become instead of who they are. And again, that alone is another day-long workshop just on that piece of how does one actually know? the age-old sort of, but who am I really? That's something that I think I didn't realize when I started focusing my own practice 2 years ago. I really pivoted when Alan and I split our coaching, when Alan went in the trauma direction and I went into the more healing and transformational coaching stuff. It was really because Alan wanted to fix the problem of trauma. That was his main passion, is fix the injury of trauma to the brain. And my passion was learn who you are. Figure out who you are. Forget about everything else. Figure out who you are, learn who you are, ask the questions of who you are so that you become invincible. When you actually know who you are, literally invincible to the world. Everything that we think matters so much stops mattering in a way that can hurt us. And so I didn't know when I went down this road a couple of years ago that I was actually opening a door all the way directly to right here, where the question now I've got back into a scientific look at who you are, as opposed to the more ethereal, spiritual way that I was looking at it previously. But I am 100% sure that they merge and they meet up again together down the road as I work my way through this. Okay, and then two more. One is the fix-it trap. This actually goes back to the first one as well, the fixing what is actually happening. So if a relationship just blew up and I'm sitting in my office with somebody who, say, just had their heart broke because their partner's leaving them, this does require quick fixes, right? I am not going to sit with somebody and say, don't worry about your broken heart. Don't worry about the fact that you're breaking down in tears and you're probably going to get fired because you can't go to work because whatever. And let's instead go deep and work from the inside out. Now, that would not be ethical of me to do, to bypass the problem, even though in the grand scheme of things, it would actually be more useful for me to go all the way back to the beginning and let the person build themselves back up from the inside out. But I probably wouldn't make much money because I wouldn't be helping people in the way that they want to be helped, which is really important to do, right? So when you do have these situational fixes, you want to be able to, with your coaching tools, you need to be able to make sure that you Put your focus on the thing that needs to be fixed, right? The broken heart, the broken trust, the insecurity, the whatever the things are associated to the current crisis. And do go in and make sure that what you're doing is helping them to release the emotion, helping them in these sort of universal ways. You want to make sure that when you're helping fix the broken thing, so the broken thing is the lack of trust or the whatever, that stuff you can get out of the way really with a really tried and true pattern of coaching. Timeline therapy, core transformation, those sorts of things that we do are actually going to be excellent. Where you need to take into consideration the wiring is in the rebuilding. So whenever I look at a client who is suffering in some way, has a specific issue that they need to get through, I look at it in two parts. One is the healing, the releasing, all of the healing work that goes along with it. It's pulling out the bad seeds, the rotten stuff. And then you go into this second phase, no matter how short I'm working, even if I'm only working with someone for 1 month, which is very short, right? Even if I'm seeing them twice a week for a month, it's still very short. But the second half of that is then reseating. Now it's important to make sure that what you're doing, whether you're preparing the person for their next business endeavor, or whether you're preparing them for the next relationship or the next shot at parenting their kid better, or whatever the thing is, right? Or some sort of recovery. This is when, more than any time in their whole entire lives, I need to be the one who's paying attention to the wiring so that they don't repeat the mistakes of the past, right? So now we've got things healed and feeling good. Now we go into the gut of, okay, let's remember who you are, figure out who you are, and piece by piece, make sure that you're actually only adjusting, changing, shifting, newly anchoring, and all that kind of stuff that actually flows in the direction of their wiring. High achievers. This is interesting, actually. So this is high achievers who need 2 glasses of wine to land at night, or they spend Saturdays comatose and they call it laziness. This is people who are so thankful for the coaching because I have helped them, or some coach or some person has helped them meet success in amazing ways that they're so happy with, but they've got so much debt now that they're repaying that the interest is killing them and going to work out badly eventually. These are the people that have these massive highs because of the coaching that they're doing or the help that they're getting, but it causes them to essentially have a big deficit somewhere. And this is so common in the world of coaching because so many people who get drawn to coaching, to being coached, are people who do have success. They do have the money. They do have the ability to have a lot of mind mastery. And so they're actually your most successful clients. They're the ones that write your testimonials. They're the ones that are telling all their friends to come see you because they had so much success with you. But what they're not telling anybody are these hidden costs. And these are the ones where it leads to who knows what, broken relationships because of they're essentially chasing something that is an impression of themselves and not their real self. So this one is always tricky because you can't convince a high achiever not to be a high achiever. It's not a good look as a coach. Just be saying, hey man, you got to take your expectations down a notch. Although I think I do this quite a bit, but you don't want to be telling people that they should reduce the vastness of what they want or the depth of their wealth or whatever. But you're really going to want to work with some modalities of success. You're going to want to make sure that the success is really well defined within their values, that you actually know their values and that you can intertwine success within that the picture of success is not some made up make-believe picture of success that is informed by other people, but that they can actually step into it and see it and hear it and touch it and smell it for themselves and make sure that they actually know that this is something that is going to make them more fully themselves, not less themselves and more some picture of a successful stranger that they think they should be. All of these are the traps that as coaches we can really fall into easily because we feel it's being asked of us. We often have the tools to be able to do a lot of this. And yet, understanding wiring will allow you to slow down, take this apart, and actually give your client an option of here's a way that you can be more fully yourself and have great relationships and stay connected and have opportunity and choice and possibility and all of this kind of stuff. Okay, it's 8:42. I have these things that I do actually want to go into. I know this is a lot. I'm dumping it on you tonight, but there's very few of you here in person, and mostly people are watching this on video. And so I want to leave the information here because I think it's so important. And a bunch of you did see the offer that I put out where I've actually developed an assessment tool now where I'm looking at the wiring in a much more broad but specific way of being able to identify where this wiring shows up. And then I'm just doing like coaching session around that purely so that there can be a deeper understanding of how your own wiring may be informing so much of what you believe yourself to be in terms of your values, your beliefs, all of that kind of stuff. I suppose I'm pitching that. If anyone wants to go more deeply into any of these things, and as I said, I am actually slowly developing a coaching program that I will be putting together. It'll be a short one. I'm not going to put together a 7-day training, but I am probably going to do a 2 or 3-day training for coaches specifically to be able to coach to wiring. These are free talks that I'm doing because I'm getting to know the material and I'm starting to adopt it into my own coaching, and I'm just learning so much. And I know that I have so many of you out there that are either learning their own brains or adapting this to their own coaching practice that I'm sharing it with you. So I feel a lot of you know me and you know I'd love to go down the rabbit hole of every single one of these, but I am just going to kind of leave them a little high level for right now. And do know that I will be coming back to all of these in one form or another, either one-on-one with you or in some sort of group thing. Okay. So what I want to end with is how this idea of how I should have been coached. It's because I have to make this all about me. But there is not going to be somebody that I can study as closely as I can study myself. And because I'm such an advocate of coaching. So those of you, the littlest bit of backstory on me is that if I write a book ever, it's going to be called The Joyful Cynic. This is what I've decided because that is who I am. I did not believe in any of this stuff. I did genuinely believe it was all pretty woo-woo, even though I considered myself a spiritual person. I had education in religion. I had all these master's degrees and I had more education than anybody's business. And I worked in humanitarian work. So I spent my life trying to help people and all that kind of stuff. But I really didn't believe in manifestation. I didn't believe in hypnosis. I didn't believe in any of this stuff. And I got pregnant. I had my babies. Alan told me to listen to these hypnosis tapes. I thought it was lame, but I was willing to indulge his weird desire for me to listen to these things. And then I went and had a baby with basically no pain. And that was the first turning point for me, where I was, what in the actual? It really blew my mind that my unconscious mind, despite the fact that my conscious mind actually this is the biggest bag of bullshit that I have ever listened to. Because this woman's voice that was, you feel no pain. I'd already had one baby, keep in mind. You'll feel just pleasure in welcoming your baby, all this stuff. And my conscious brain the whole time was whatever lady. And then I literally went on to have my second child with virtually no pain. And so that reality for me of what in the actual just happened, my unconscious clearly accepted something that the rest of me could not. And I was delighted by it. So it certainly turned for me. And then that was when I became a birthing coach and I was so excited by it all. And then I went and got my NLP training. When I got my NLP training, I still thought I was pretty cynical. And the undeniable truth of how much I was able to change, how much shame I was able to drop. It was undeniable, even to the most skeptic of brains. It was so undeniable that there was no chance that I was going to do anything else with my life. It was just pretty clear how much I knew it from that point on that this was what I was going to do. And it was such a beautiful synthesis with everything else that I had learned up until this point, right? And then you guys know the rest of the story for the last 12 years. That's what I've been doing, and just evolving and just learning new ways of coaching and just learning everything. So I loved the coaches that I had. I can't tell you how much I appreciate. I have had some people that I've worked with that I do think were kind of crap at their thing, but never coaching. I've had some energy workers that I question whether or not they were just taking my $200 and then waving their hands around. I've had some questionable other practitioners. I've definitely had some questionable people, but the people that I have used for coaching for myself personally over the last 12 years, whether it was once or twice or whether it was ongoing, I would say hands down, I think they were all amazing. So when I say how should I have been coached over the years, I am by no stretch taking a shot at anybody who did any coaching to me, sort of put that out there, both personally and also just because it's important. That's an important part of this. This is not a criticism. But of course, because I was a coach and so often the people that I was working with, I annoyingly, all coaches do, would direct them on how to coach me. I didn't go in with, I don't know what's wrong with me. I would go in with, okay, here's the 12 things that are wrong with me and the 4 beliefs that go along with each of them, and where I went in with that kind of stuff. And so I was essentially directing myself in a way and towards a way of being that was aligned with who I thought I should be. Everyone does. And I have this list here of, had I known differently, if I was able to go back a decade and ask to be coached differently, the first thing that I would do is I would absolutely have been coached to not believe that the things that I wanted were wrong to want them. And unfortunately, a lot of the coaching that I experienced was in an effort to try and change the things that I wanted. And it wasn't out of anything other than, wouldn't it be better to want things that are better for you? That will bring you more money, that will bring you more success by any definition or whatever, right? That sort of thing. And so it really did. Often I successfully changed the things that I wanted. So I really wanted to have a property where I could have all of the different animals that I want in the world. I want a pig and a tortoise, so all that stuff. And I want them to live in my house. But being coached away from those things was not useful for me because they never stopped. I still want a pig and a tortoise in my house. And I will want that until the day that I die. I may decide that it's not conducive to my life to do that because of all the other problems that would go along with it. But I'm not going to stop wanting it. And that's one of the things that I think is so essential. The reward system lights up huge when we allow ourselves to want those things, no matter how realistic or unrealistic that they are. What we need to learn to do, if I have been coached in a way where I could actually see that as something really beautiful about myself and trust my own cognition and my own wisdom and my own maturity to know that, Tara, you probably shouldn't bring a pig into the house because you have 3 small children. And I can trust myself to know that. But I don't need to stop wanting it and dreaming for it and imagining what it would be and tempering that, trying to stifle that was such a mistake that I was making through my own coaching, where I actually believed that I should stop wanting the things that aren't realistic and in place only want things that are realistic. But that was terrible for my chemistry. That's terrible for my thinking. And all of you who have wiring this, who want things that are unrealistic, it's essential you find a coach who can allow you, who can use that as the stimulating way to actually trust and rely on the other parts of you and continue to be able to get the dopamine and get all this stuff from the wanting of all of those things. So I won't go on about that one. I think I made the point. But that's also these boundaries where I have a mistake of oversharing in my life. I do one or the other. I either don't share anything or I overshare. Mostly I overshare. And then I regret it. And this has been a constant pattern throughout all of my life. And it's the number of times that I have been coached to try to teach myself that it's not professional. You shouldn't be telling your clients these things. You shouldn't be sharing with your students this way. You shouldn't be sharing with whoever, whatever. You should be more. There's this whole thing. And so a lot of the coaching I did was, what is wrong with me? Is it that I'm so needy for people to know my story that I need to? And I had all of these different reasons. And I would go back into, when did I make the decision that I need to tell people everything so that they can, because I need to be understood or whatever the heck, right? All this stuff. But understanding now that oversharing is something very common to ADHD, and those people with ADHD wiring who don't do it, it's probably because they have been traumatized by doing it or so severely punished for doing it, or so severely modeled not to do it, or society has conformed them to believe that they shouldn't do it, that they don't do it. But then they're left with this connection hunger. So essentially what happens is that we have ADHD, the thing that we experience more than anybody else is this low inhibition, right? So we have low inhibition and we have this connection hunger. And oversharing creates instant intimacy for us. So if I tell you for real about what's going on, it is intimate. I'm essentially almost forcing intimacy because it allows me to know that I have shared this and been vulnerable or whatever. And there's usually no problem with it, except for that you think there's a problem with it. So if it comes back, so all these people who are different, who don't overshare because they use importance, they use their cognition, they use all of these other methods for deciding what they're going to share with a person, but they don't have this 1, 2, 3 hit to try and get connection. We do. Those people feel they're right when people end up having it come back in our face, right? I overshare, and then, I don't know, whoever tells somebody, and then somebody says, oh, I wouldn't coach with her because she doesn't have that part of her life under control or whatever, and I lost a client. And those sorts of things certainly can happen, right? We all have stories about oversharing. But people with ADHD also have this hyper rejection sensitivity thing, right? We have this RSD going on. And so that tends to be the reason why you feel it's a mistake. If you think back evidence-wise, I bet you're 1 in 20 when it actually came back to bite you. And the other 19 times, for the most part, either the person didn't care and they just thought you were the weirdo, or they thought you were lovely and they are envious of your vulnerability. And they totally related and were thankful that you were there to share so that they could feel it, right? That's probably what happened. And then one time you ran into somebody who gossiped, or I don't know, whatever the negative thing is. But that RSD, that rejection thing, is whispering in your head that fear of whatever negative thing might happen. You also, by the way, have, because you're so afraid of rejection, you do have a little pattern running, which I don't know, I haven't decided yet. You guys can help me figure this out, but I haven't decided if that little pattern that says if they know everything about me, they can't then discover something about me that will cause them to leave or reject me. I'll just put it all out there. So I told you my flaws. I told you everything about me that is problematic, so you can't find out anything. And I told you didn't find out, which is really protective, right? And that is, I don't know, it might be something that you could help coach somebody away from, but I don't know. I haven't thought about it a lot yet. Okay, I'll try and run through these last ones. Anyone that has to go at 9 o'clock, I completely understand. I have until 9:15. So if you want to stay till 9:15, I do have a bunch more of these, but I will understand if you go. Okay. I do wish that I had a coach who actually understood getting me in touch with my feelings and not just my head. So many of you have this. I would say that just about, I don't know why, but so many people have this thing going on. But because ADHD emotions run fast and loud, right? All of us know that they run fast and loud. What you do with the fast and loud probably has a lot more to do with your conditioning and all of that kind of stuff. But we outsource to our head where it's much quieter. So because our head, we're used to it up there. So that the masking actually teaches us to talk about our feelings instead of feeling our feelings. So we tend to be very good at talking about our feelings. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have paid enormous amounts of money for really high-level coaches. And then I have sabotaged my whole entire session by talking about my feelings and never actually doing anything about them, never letting the coach do anything about them because I love it and they love it and I'm interesting and they're interesting. And then we have these, and you guys know this because I've probably done it with every single one of you. But it's one of those things where I think in terms of the ADHD wiring, that is something that has to be dealt with a little bit differently than somebody who may be very thinky, maybe a very cognitive brain-based person, but it's not because of ADHD. It's because that's the neurotypical person who just also really loves being in their mind, different from somebody who sends their emotions to their head and leaves them there to be dealt with. Anyway, an interesting thing to dissect. The other thing that would have been so helpless is a coach who could have helped me stop the endless list of unexplored options. So this is one that's tricky because it's a little bit taking away the most delicious part of the dopamine, but novelty is dopamine. And so the shine of all those new options, it really bids the memory of the last disappointment. So it can feel, that experience you have when something super sucked and it was terrible. And you knew in the moment that you needed to change something and never do this again and learn from this and all that radical way of feeling. But then upon reflection, a couple hours later, a couple days later, a couple weeks, months later, you look back and you're like, that wasn't so bad. And actually, I learned a lot from it. And if I had just adjusted a little bit this way, it probably actually does hold the potential that I thought that it did and the possibility and all of that kind of stuff. So you end up with this pattern of just repeating the same mistakes over and over again. This is very much the wiring. This is not wisdom. This is not resilience. This is wiring. And so to be able to actually find a way to stop the list of endless options on something that just needs to be shut down. Just you didn't get it, so don't do it anymore. Don't think of 17 different ways how you could modify it so that maybe you will get. Just move on. And this is really, really tough when you have a high intellect and you have that possibility brain and all that kind of stuff because your brain is just wired to move toward it and to let go of the bad. Obviously, this is not true when it's trauma or when it's a significant emotional event or anything like that, but it is true when it's the patterns of our life. The next one is the just because I can doesn't mean I should. It's probably written in the Bible of ADHD wiring brains. Whoever up there engineered this wiring was, hey man, let's make a species. Let's make a type within the species who, if they can, will do it all. Just all of it. Just yes, yes, all around. So that would have been something. It's something that we tend to not try. We do try and get coaching around it, but then we move it away from the real problem. So it would have been lovely for me a decade ago if I had a coach who had been able to actually get me to figure out how to say no, which is not easy, guys. This is not an easy task for ADHD wiring, right? It's what runs us. It's what makes the engine go. So coming up with creative ways to be able to get the brain to get just as excited about saying no as it does about saying yes is a really great skill that I am currently trying to put some tools and techniques around. I need pretty things and cozy things and creative things. This is something sensory beauty, not even beauty, because it's not even beauty. It's not even beauty. It's just like the things that I think are beautiful and cozy and all that kind of stuff. This is not indulgence. So I actually really think it would have been helpful had I had some coaching to somebody that was, it's okay. It's okay to spend as much time as you need on your environment to make yourself feel good, to get this dopamine infrastructure around you. The cozy part is it's recharging your wiring when you do it. And this is something that too often we are told doesn't belong in a professional setting, doesn't belong in a successful setting very often. Again, this is something we could explore so much around, but it would have been so lovely to just have had a coach who'd been, it's okay, man. Do your thing and surround yourself by what makes you stimulated that way. Not being understood. So this is a complicated one, right? I don't even think this has much to do with ADHD-ness. I think it probably has much more to do with just like humanness. I don't know if I could think of many clients of mine who haven't had this as a problem. I don't know why I'm burning up. Understanding, accepting that you won't be understood by many and to instead settle for love and affection. Letting people just have affection for you, even while they don't understand you, is tough. And again, I don't know. I haven't explored deep enough to figure out how this is really, if it is more connected to the ADHD part of my particular wiring, or if that's just a personality thing. I don't know. But I'm suspecting that it does. I'm suspecting that it has something to do with that wiring because of the insistence on, no, but I'm different. No, but I'm different. No, but I'm different. The wanting to get really validated for the different, which I, again, think might be universal, but it's so wonderful to be able to find that way of just accepting that people really like you, even when they don't understand you very much. And that's okay. It's such a difficult thing for very spinny brains, especially when you feel like you are your brain, to accept. The believing the experience and not rewriting them. So because our imaginations are the source of pleasure, the source of motivation, the source of the fuel, it's actually much more likely for somebody with an ADHD-wired brain to be rewriting in live time. So not quite believing the experience that they're having, but instead believing the interpretation that their imagination is having about the experience. And I don't mean to make it sound like everyone with ADHD has schizophrenia or something. That's not, it's not as though you're like disconnected from reality. That's not at all what's happening. But it is, you do have to pay attention to something, right? In any given moment, I could pay attention to what my body is. That's funny that I just did that. I'm noticing that my cheeks are so red. I'm obviously like super warm, and it's not terribly warm in here. I could be paying attention to what I'm actually experiencing. I could be paying attention to you guys and your facial expressions. I could be paying attention to what my notes told me I should have said and cut. There's 100 things I could be paying attention to. And very often what we'll pay attention to is how we want things to be instead of how they're actually being. So this mantra, it would have been lovely to have been coached into trying to settle into the experience. And I don't just mean being present, because even when you're present, you still have to direct your attention somewhere, right? I could be totally present just watching you guys. I could be totally present, really paying attention to my own body. Those are both very present things to do, but I have a tendency to actually be paying attention to my kind of imagined experience of how I want this to be. So that's a tricky one. There's a lot of nuance to that, but it's one that I know has been very problematic, and it makes it hard then after to get, you have a leaky feedback loop. So I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but here I'm probably oversharing. But I don't like feedback whichever way it comes. I don't like positive feedback because I tend not to believe it. I tend to think then that the person focused on something that is incomplete. If they tell me it was amazing, I'm like, yeah, but you're ignoring all the, I don't know. It's just, it doesn't make me feel bad. It's not like an insecurity. It's just that I would rather not get the flattering feedback because, I don't know, because of a discomfort. I also obviously don't want the negative feedback because that makes me feel bad. So it very often, and I know now I've talked to enough of my clients who share this same thing where it's like, they just don't want to know. And essentially what's happening with an ADHD-wired brain, maybe more so than neurotypical brains, is that it lets you just live in the like way that you imagined things to be. And it doesn't have to be tainted by anything else that is going to make it difficult for you. So it's again, it would have been really nice for me to have had some coaching along the way that would have allowed me to understand what was happening with my wiring so that I could have been more open to feedback, both positive and negative, and had some way, which again, I haven't quite figured out, but I think I do, but some way to be able to actually work with it so that you can just have a broader experience of what's actually going on and believe what's going on. Okay, last 2, 3. I'm smarter than my impulsivity. The impulse is, I don't know, there's different types of ADHD, and what I said right in the beginning, some of you are going to have more and less of like different aspects of it or whatever. But the impulse that arrives before that prefrontal cortex is dressed. The pause, you really are smarter than the impulsivity. No matter how insane your ADHD can make you feel sometimes, where like literally you can't hold back on the impulse, like you can't, you are smarter than that. And a way to be able to expand that pause would be vital. It's something that, like, even if the person coming to you doesn't think they're coming to you for ADHD at all, or if that's what you notice is a pattern where there's an impulsivity that sort of gets them into trouble. And I'm not talking about like stealing a car or like drinking or whatever, not the typical ones. I'm talking about impulsivity, like deciding to buy something or writing something off or deciding to work on one thing instead of the other. Just little impulsive choices that you make that don't serve you. Okay. And then the last one I'll share with you is to not be so agreeable. This is a big one. Again, I was really careful about, is this ADHD or is this just me? Is this just because I'm like a third child or whatever? Like all the other millions of explanations why a person can become agreeable, of which there are infinite, right? So this is not exclusive to ADHD, but it is more common for people with ADHD. And it's just simply because we have grown up knowing that we cause trouble when we try and have things our way, essentially. So it's just a lifetime, usually, of knowing that, like, when you're arguing to do it your way, chances are the better part of the population out there, the bigger part of the group, is not going to think the way you think, feel the way you feel, want the things you want. And so you do end up learning that it is much more harmonious as a human being to be more agreeable, to avoid, you learn really well how to not make yourself feel like you're being difficult, but also you have a hypersensitivity to other people feeling bad because you're so used to feeling bad. Like anything, right? Somebody with, I don't know, who has, I don't know, been teased because they have a big nose or something is going to be way more sensitive to other people and their noses. This is pretty obvious. And so those of us who have just been a little bit more hurt because we have a lifetime of feeling like we're fundamentally broken are just way more sensitive to not making other people feel bad by telling them that their idea is not a good idea or that you don't want to do it or that it's not the right one or whatever. So you end up just with a lot of people who have this kind of wiring who are overly agreeable because they're so sensitive to it. So it would have been nice in my own coaching if I could have understood it as a wiring thing as opposed to just a weakness. I just assumed that the reason I'm so agreeable is because I'm fundamentally weak in that part of my character. And it's not true. I'm not a weak person, but I do have a very heightened sensitivity to not making other people's ideas seem like they're not good ideas. And I would much sooner just stay with, it's fine. I'll be the one who doesn't really get what I want. I'm used to that. Par for the course. Let's do what you want because it makes me, it's easier. So those are like in a nutshell. And I have gone 15 minutes over, but I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful. And while it's obviously very self-indulgent to go through my own experience, I could guess that a lot of you could probably do this with your own experience. And by the way, I had fabulous coaches who did find the things often. Like I said, it did work. I was getting coached to be a better version of myself lots of the time. It's just that lots of the time I was getting coached to feel even worse about the person that I seem to consistently be. And this is what I'm going to be doing with you. Those of you that any of you doing the assessment and the thing that I put out there, this is really a look at what worked and what didn't. And I have built up really specific ways to get into that because I think it's so valuable to do. So my message, guys, the hunger is not the problem. The seeking the stimulation is not the problem. Ignoring that you have things that you are seeking is the problem. And as a coach, we need to make sure that we are not helping people mask better, but instead we're actually helping people unmask and be stronger when they unmask.